Every morning starts the same way. I wake up at 6, whether the alarm clock works or not, an old habit developed over decades of service. My body doesn't remember what retirement is anymore. 75 isn't the age to break habits, especially healthy ones. This morning, too, I woke up at 6 sharp. My bedroom windows faced east, and the first rays of sunlight were already shining through the old blinds. Yankton was waking up with me. This town had never been noisy, but it had gotten even quieter in recent years. Young people are leaving in search of a better life. Only old people like me and those who have nowhere else to go. My house hasn't changed in 30 years. The same creaking floorboards, the same old sofa in the living room, the same faded photos on the walls. My wife has been smiling from them for 20 years since her death. Sometimes I talk to her, especially when Theodore and Imogene come in with another request. My son and daughter-in-law are the ones who bring confusion to my measured life. Theodore is my only child. Sometimes I think Martha and I spoil him too much. He never knew rejection, always got the best. College, a car, a down payment on a house. We gave him all that. And what did we get in return? A 40-year-old man who still can't make ends meet. After breakfast, I went out on the porch with a cup of coffee. A neighbor, Doreen Quinlan, was already digging in her flower beds. She's 68, but has more energy than many 30-year-olds. She waved at me. "Good morning, Lemuel. How did you sleep?" "The usual, Doreen. I wake up too early and go to sleep too late." She laughed, but there was something like worry in her eyes. "Did Theodore stop by last night?" "I saw his car." I nodded. Neighbors notice everything. That's the way it is in small towns. "He did, with Imogene. They wanted to see the old man." Doreen pressed her lips together. She never said it out loud, but I knew what she thought of my son and his wife. That they only visit me when they need something. And more often than not, she's right. "How long are they in town for?" "They said they're in town for a week. They're staying at that motel up the road." "Motel?" Doreen was surprised. "Why not your place?" I shrugged. "They said they didn't want to bother me, but they promised to come over for dinner tomorrow." Doreen went back to her flowers, and I went back into the house. On the kitchen table was the picture I always keep on the mantelpiece of Martha and me holding the newborn Theodore. We were so happy then, so naive. The son began to change after his mother died. Martha was always a buffer between us. She could smooth things over, find compromises. When she was gone, Theodore and I were left alone with our differences. I walked to my office, a small room in the back of the house. This is where I spend most of my day. I read the newspapers, watch old movies, sometimes review documents from my time as a bailiff. 35 years in the system, I've seen everything. Family dramas, betrayals, greed, deceit. It was all part of my daily work. I remember once having to inventory the estate of a man whose own brother was suing him over an inheritance. They hadn't spoken in 10 years, but when the smell of money hit, kinship was suddenly reawakened. Or the woman who tried to hide all her assets from her husband in a divorce by signing them over to her elderly mother. People get resourceful when it comes to money. I pulled out my notebook and flipped through the pages with notes on Theodore's last visits. 3 months ago, needed money to fix his car. 5 months ago, asking for help paying for health insurance. 4 visits in the past year, each time with his hand out. Last night was no exception. They arrived after dinner. Imogene was dressed far too smartly for a routine visit to her father-in-law's house. Bright red dress, massive earrings, high-heeled shoes. She always liked to impress. "Daddy, how are you?" Theodore hugged me. He smelled of expensive cologne. "We were so worried, you rarely answer the phone." "I'm fine," I answered, letting them into the house. "The phone goes bad sometimes. It's old, like me." "You need a new one, Lemuel," Imogene said, looking around as if she were here for the first time. "And anyway, the house is in need of repair. Have you thought of moving to a more modern place? Maybe closer to us?" I chuckled. They live in Minneapolis, 300 miles away. Closer to them means away from my house, away from Martha's grave in the local cemetery, away from everything I care about. "I'm fine here," I answered. "Tea, coffee?" They declined tea, but not conversation. Theodore sat down across from me and leaned forward, as he always did when he wanted to ask for something. "Dad, we've been thinking, maybe you should move into a nursing home. They'll take care of you. You'll be under the care of doctors. I'm not that infirm yet, son, I said calmly, though I was seething inside. I can manage on my own for now. But this can't go on forever, Imogene interjected. We're just worried about you. I looked her straight in the eye. Thank you for your concern, but I'll stay here for now. Theodore leaned back in his chair, casting a quick glance at his wife. Something flashed between them, a silent message only the two of them could understand. I've seen it many times in my work. Spouses, accomplices, partners in crime, they always have their own secret language. How's your job, son? I asked, changing the subject. Still at that consulting firm? Theodore hesitated. Well, actually, I'm between projects right now. The market is unstable, you know. Between projects is what he's been calling his unemployment for over a year now. Imogen works at a fashion boutique, but her paycheck is barely enough for their life in the big city, especially with their habits of spending more than they earn. I understand, I nodded. Times are tough. Exactly, Theodore said. And you know, Dad, we've been thinking, you always said you were saving for a rainy day. Maybe it's a rainy day now. Not for you, but for us. We need financial support to start our own business. I have a great idea for a startup. This is it, the real reason they're here. What kind of startup? I asked, even though I already knew it was another bogus one. An online real estate investment platform, Theodore began enthusiastically. Imagine, ordinary people can invest small amounts and become co-owners of real estate. It's a revolution in investing. We need startup capital to hire programmers and launch the platform. I listened and nodded, as I've done many times before. Previously, he had a revolutionary idea for a mobile app for dog walking. Before that, a chain of eco-cafes. Even before that, an organic food delivery service. None of these ideas have progressed beyond talk. How much do you need? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Well, for starters, about 100,000, Theodore said casually. That's the minimum to launch the basic version of the platform. Imogen watched my reaction carefully. Her manicured fingers tapped nervously on the arm of the chair. It's a lot of money, I said after a pause. I need to think about it. Of course, Dad, Theodore smiled with relief. He took my words as agreement, just delayed in time. We're in no hurry to go anywhere. Well, I mean, the sooner the better, of course. The market doesn't wait. As they left, I noticed Theodore lingering in the hallway, glancing at my office door. There behind an old painting is a safe. He's known about it since he was a kid. Knows that's where I keep important documents and money. Money I've been saving for years, denying myself many things. For a rainy day, as I always said. After they left, I sat in silence for a long time. My mind was reeling with memories from my professional life. How many times I'd seen families broken up over money, children stealing from their parents. How brothers and sisters became sworn enemies over inheritance. I got up and went into the study. I pulled back the painting and opened the safe. Wads of money lay there, neatly folded, the result of decades of thrift. I'd always distrusted banks, especially after the crisis of 2008. I preferred to keep my savings at home, close at hand. I knew my son. I knew that sooner or later the temptation would become too strong. Maybe this visit was just a reconnaissance mission. He was checking to see if I was there, if the money was there, if the locks worked. After closing the safe, I went back into the kitchen and made myself another cup of coffee. From the window, I could see Theodore's car drive slowly past the house, even though they had already said goodbye and should have been at their motel. He circled around like a shark smelling blood. I finished my coffee and decided to take a walk. Yankton's a small town. Everyone knows each other here. On the corner, I met Sheriff Holden, an old friend of mine. Lemuel, he shook my hand. Haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? I'm good, Patrick. My son came to visit. Holden nodded. Yeah, I saw him yesterday. He and his wife stopped by the bank. Interesting. They didn't mention a visit to the bank. What were they doing there? I asked as a matter of fact. I have no idea. I just saw them coming out of there. They looked upset. I thanked the sheriff and continued my walk, but my thoughts were now revolving around this new information. Why would they want the bank? What were they doing there? And why did they look upset? Back home, I noticed that the picture on the mantle wasn't standing the way I'd left it. Someone had picked it up, and that someone could only be Theodore, stopping by to say goodbye while Imogene waited for him in the car. I ran my hand along the wall next to the fireplace. There, behind a panel, was another hiding place. A small one that even Theodore didn't know about. There lay Martha's old notebook and something else. A key to a deposit box at a bank in a neighboring town. The place where some of my savings were kept. The part that no living soul knew about. Late that night, the phone rang. It was Theodore. Daddy, Imogene and I were thinking, why don't we stop by your place early tomorrow? We could help around the house, go to the store. His voice sounded too cheerful, too caring. Sure, son, I said. I'll be waiting. I hung up the phone and went to the window. It was already dark outside, but I drew the curtains anyway. Then I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Old bailiff habits, always on guard, always expecting the worst. I knew they were up to something, and I was ready for it. Years on the job have taught me one important thing. Trust but verify, especially when it comes to family, especially when it comes to money. Theodore wasn't always like that. Once, many years ago, I saw genuine affection in his eyes. He was 7 the first time I took him fishing. We sat in an old boat in the middle of Lewis Lake, me teaching him how to put bait on the hook. His little fingers were trembling, but he was trying to be brave like a real man. Daddy, doesn't it hurt the fish? He asked in a whisper. It probably hurts, son, I answered honestly. But that's life. Sometimes someone has to be hurt so that others can live. He thought about my words, his childish face serious beyond his years. Then he smiled and cast his rod. That day we caught 3 bass and 1 catfish. Theodore was so proud when Martha cooked them for dinner. I caught that one, Mom. Yeah, what happened to that boy? When did he turn into a man who looks at me like an ATM machine? The morning after Theodore and Imogene's visit was overcast. Heavy clouds hung over Yankton, promising rain. I sat in the kitchen, drinking coffee and looking through an old photo album. Here's Theodore getting his high school diploma. Here's his college. Here's his wedding to Imogene. They met in their senior year. I remember how worried Martha was about this girl. There's something wrong about her, Lemuel. She looks at our boy as a project to be remodeled to fit her. Martha had always been perceptive. I, on the other hand, wrote off her concern as the usual mother-in-law jealousy of her daughter-in-law. But the years proved her right. After the wedding, Theodore began to change. At first, imperceptibly, a new haircut, new clothes, new friends. Then more strongly, other interests, other values. And after Martha's death, the changes became irreversible. I was distracted from my thoughts by the phone ringing. It was Doreen. Lemuel, have you seen the morning news? No, what about it? An elderly couple was mugged in the next county over. They tied them up, took their life savings. Police say it's the 3rd one this month. I thanked my neighbor for the information and hung up. At any other time, I would have simply lamented the decline in morals, but now the news made me wonder. What if Theodore's visits had a more sinister purpose than simply asking for money? What if he had decided to take a different path? My phone rang again. This time it was Theodore. Dad, we'll be at your place in an hour. Do you need anything from the store? No, thanks, I'm all set. Are you sure? Imogene can make dinner. She's really good at lasagna. I suppressed a chuckle. In all their years of marriage, I'd never seen Imogene cook. They always ate at restaurants or ordered delivery. No need to worry. I've already had breakfast and I'm going for a walk. A walk? I could hear the irritation in his voice. But we said we'd be there. I'll be back for lunch. The walk won't take more than an hour. As I hung up the phone, I was relieved. I needed some time alone with my thoughts. Putting on an old jacket, I walked out of the house. It hadn't started raining yet, but the air was damp and heavy. I headed toward the park. Yankton is a small town, but there are plenty of places to be alone, especially on a cloudy weekday. I walked down the familiar streets, nodding to the occasional passerby. Most of them I knew by name. There was Mrs. Pringle walking her poodle. Here was Mr. Donovan opening his hardware store. Just an ordinary day in a small town. When I reached the park, I sat down on a bench under an old elm tree. From here, I had a view of the Missouri River, gray and choppy on this overcast day. I sat and stared at the water, immersed in memories. 20 years had passed since Martha's death, But the pain of loss had not subsided. It had simply become a part of me, like wrinkles on my face or gray in my hair. Martha was my anchor, my compass. Without her, I was lost, and Theodore sensed it. Perhaps he even took advantage of it. The first signs came at the wake. Theodore and Imogen sat next to me, accepting condolences from friends and neighbors. At one point, I heard Imogen whisper to him, "Ask him about insurance." Now would be a good time. I pretended I hadn't heard, but from that day on, I paid closer attention. I noticed a pattern. Their visits always coincided with times when they needed money. At first, small amounts, for car repairs, for the dentist. Then more for a down payment on a house, a vacation in Hawaii, and I always gave. Because he was my son, flesh and blood. Because Martha would want me to help him. Because I hoped that one day he'd grow up and stop asking. But he didn't. Instead, the amounts grew and the intervals between requests shortened. Then 3 months ago, something happened that made me reevaluate our relationship. I stopped by unannounced that day. I was passing through Minneapolis and had decided to visit my son. Theodore wasn't home. He was at a job interview, Imogen had said. She reluctantly invited me in and offered me tea. Their apartment was furnished with expensive furniture. A huge television hung on the wall, and an expensive stereo system stood on a shelf. It was a sharp contrast to their constant complaints about their lack of money. "It's beautiful here," I said. "It's Theodore," Imogen replied with feigned modesty. "He has impeccable taste." I nodded, not showing my thoughts. My son had never been interested in interior design. It was clearly Imogen's merit, not his. While she was making tea, I noticed an envelope with the bank's logo on the coffee table. Imogen stepped away for a moment, and I couldn't resist looking inside. It was a credit card statement. The amount of purchases was staggering. Designer clothes, restaurants, beauty salons, and a total debt of over $40,000. I quickly put the envelope back, but what I saw kept me on my toes. Theodore and Imogen were living large and in debt, and yet they were always asking me for money. Where were the funds going? Certainly not to pay off their loans. I left that day with a heavy heart. When I got home, I called my old friend Ronald Pearson. We'd worked together years ago. Then he'd gone into the police force and was now retired but still connected. "Ronnie," I said after the usual greetings, "I need your help." "What's wrong, Lem?" "It's about my son and my money." I told him about my suspicions. I told him I was afraid Theodore might take more drastic measures than just asking. That I wanted to protect my savings, but in a way that would teach him a lesson if he did decide to steal. Ronnie listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was silent for a long time. "Are you sure you want to do this?" he finally asked. "He is your son, after all." "That's exactly why I want to do it," I answered. "If he steals the money and goes unpunished, it will only reinforce the idea that such behavior is acceptable." "All right," Ronnie said after a pause. "I know how to help you." A week later, he brought me a wad of money. But it wasn't regular money. "These are training bills," he explained. "We use them to train recruits and bank tellers. They look almost like the real thing, but they have special markings that invalidate them." I took one bill and examined it closely. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary $100 bill. But if you look closely, you can see a small inscription, "Example," on both sides, and a serial number beginning with the letters XX. "In daylight and close inspection, you can see the difference," Ronnie continued. "But if you pick them up in the dark or in a hurry, you can easily be fooled." "How many of these have you got?" 750,000, just like you asked. And every bill is marked." I nodded. The sum was impressive, all my savings over the years. The money I'd been saving for my old age, for medical treatment if I needed it. Money that I hoped would someday help Theodore if he was in real trouble. Not the kind he'd created for himself. Supernum. "What am I supposed to do with real money?" I asked. "Hide it somewhere safe. Someplace Theodore can't get to." At home, I carefully packed the study bills in the same way I had stored the real ones, in rubber-banded bundles, then in plastic bags. They looked exactly the same as they had before. I put them in the safe behind the painting, but the real money. I hid the real money where no one would think to look, in an old beehive house in the far corner of the garden. Martha used to keep bees, but after she died, I gave up the hobby. The hive stands as a monument to our life together. Who would think of looking for money in there? Every week I checked the safe in the study. The study bills lay untouched. I was almost beginning to doubt my suspicions. Maybe I was wrong about Theodore. Maybe he would never go to such lengths. But then Theodore and Imogene came to Yankton again, and I noticed a change in their behavior. They became more attentive, more caring. Too caring. Imogene offered to clean the windows. Theodore insisted on fixing a creaking floorboard in the hallway just across the hall from my office. And yesterday I overheard them talking when they thought I was asleep. They were standing in the backyard, and I could see their silhouettes through the window. "We need to move faster," Imogene said. "The bills aren't waiting." "I know," Theodore replied. "Honor, but we can't just take the money." "Why not? You've seen them. They're in the safe. He doesn't even lock it. We just take it and leave." "What if he reports it to the police?" Imogen laughed. "You're his son. You'll say he gave you the money as a present. Who'd believe an old man who might be suffering from senile dementia?" As I listened to their conversation, my blood ran cold in my veins. They weren't just planning to steal my money. They planned to declare me insane if I tried to return it. But the worst part was that Theodore didn't object. He didn't defend me, didn't say it was wrong. He was just looking for the least risky way to steal from his own father. "We have no choice," he continued after a pause. "The debt collectors have already called me at work. If we don't pay at least part of what we owe by the end of the month, they'll sue. How much do we need?" "At least 100,000 to get them off our backs. But if we take all of it, we could pay them all off and start fresh," Imogene finished for him. "Maybe even leave the country. I've always wanted to live in France." Theodore put his arm around her. "It'll be all right. We'll do it tomorrow when he goes for a walk. We'll take the money, go to the airport and buy tickets. We'll be far away by tonight." I quietly stepped away from the window and went back into my bedroom. Inside me, anger and sadness struggled. Anger that my own son was willing to do such a thing, and sadness at the realization that I had lost him long before that moment. The raindrops on my face brought me back to reality. As I sat on the bench, immersed in my memories, it began to rain. I pulled up the collar of my jacket and hurried home. Theodore and Imogene were probably waiting for me. On the way, I thought about what would happen next, how they would open the safe and find the money, how happy they'd be with their easy score, and how shocked they'd be when they tried to use the bills. I didn't want my son to become a thief, but if he chooses to become one, let him learn a lesson I should have taught him as a father years ago. That afternoon, after returning from my walk, I found Theodore and Imogen in my kitchen. They were sitting at the table with cups of coffee as if it were their home. Imogene offered me lunch-warm soup from a can with feigned concern. "You're soaked, Dad," Theodore said as I took off my wet jacket. "You shouldn't go out in this weather. You might get sick." I just nodded, not wanting to argue. All day long they fussed around me, offering to help me with one thing or another. Theodore fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom. Imogene dusted the shelves. Though I'd asked her not to, they were unnaturally attentive. Their care seemed contrived, fake. In the evening, we had dinner together. Theodore talked about his plans for the future, about the prospect of working in Minneapolis. It was all idle talk. I knew that their real plans were quite different. As I watched them, I noticed troubling signs. They avoided looking into each other's eyes. Imogene kept checking the time on her expensive watch, my gift to them on their 10th wedding anniversary. "Will you be staying the night?" I asked as dinner drew to a close. Theodore exchanged a quick glance with his wife. "No, Dad, we're going back to the motel. We don't want to embarrass you." "You're not embarrassing me. The guest room is always ready." "We've already paid for the room," Imogene interjected. It wouldn't be wise to waste money. I could barely contain a chuckle. It was the first time I'd ever heard her talk about spending money wisely. "Minus suit yourself. Just call me if there's a change of plans." They left around 9 p.m., assuring me that they'd stop by tomorrow morning. I stood at the window for a long time, looking after their car. Then I methodically checked all the doors and windows, making sure the house was securely closed. In the bedroom closet, I pulled out an old baseball bat, not to use it, but to feel safer. Years as a bailiff had taught me to be careful. Before going to bed, I checked the safe in my office one more time. The study bills lay untouched, neatly packed in bundles. In the faint light of the desk lamp, it was hard to see the differences from real money. Only if you knew exactly what to look at could you make out the word example and the special serial numbers. I closed the safe, put the painting back where it belonged, and went to bed. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay staring at the ceiling and thought about my son, the boy I was teaching to ride a bike, about the teenager who was embarrassed to talk to me about girls, about the young man who brought Imogene home one day and said, "Dad, Mom, this is the girl." Somewhere in the back of my mind I was hoping I was wrong, that Theodore wouldn't come for the money, that I'd wake up in the morning and laugh at my paranoia. But deep down, I knew the truth. Theodore had changed. Or maybe he'd always been like that. I just didn't want to see it. I don't know when I finally fell asleep, but I woke up to a subtle noise. The clock on my bedside table read 3:25 in the morning. It was still dark outside the window, the rain drumming on the roof. I lay still, listening. At first I thought I was dreaming about the noise, but then I heard it again. The quiet creak of the floorboards in the hallway, the same floorboard that Theodore had supposedly fixed during the day. Carefully, trying not to make any noise, I got out of bed. Years of work had taught me to move quietly even in my old age. I picked up the bat and walked to the bedroom door. Opening it an inch, I peered out into the dark hallway. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed a faint beam of light coming from my office. The light of a pocket flashlight, dimmed so as to be barely noticeable. I moved silently down the hallway, pressing myself against the wall to avoid the creaking floorboards. The office door was ajar. Through the crack I saw two figures, Theodore standing on a chair in front of the wall where the painting hung, and Imogen holding a flashlight. "Hurry," she whispered. "We must get there before dawn." "I'm trying," Theodore replied in the same whisper. "The safe is old and it's hard to open." I heard him fiddling with the safe door. "Martha gave me this safe 30 years ago, for our anniversary. To store your most precious things," she'd said then. I kept documents, family photos, and of course, money in there. Theodore had known about the safe since he was a child, although he had never seen its contents. "It's opening," he exclaimed in a muffled voice. "Quiet," Imogene hissed. "You'll wake the old man." I gripped the handle of the bat tighter, but did not move. I wanted to see it through to the end. "Jesus," Theodore breathed. "It's all there. All 750,000. In the flashlight's beam, I saw him take out wads of money and hand them to Imogene. She was putting them into the big gym bag they'd brought with them. "Make sure there's nothing left," she said when the safe was empty. Theodore gave the inside of the safe another glance, then closed the door and put the painting back in place. "It's done. Let's go." They moved toward the door, and I retreated into the shadows, into the small alcove between the study and the bathroom. From there I could see them sneaking down the hallway toward the exit, but they couldn't see me. Theodore was carrying a bag. It was heavy. I could see him grabbing it to make it more comfortable. Imogene walked ahead, lighting the way with a flashlight. They moved like thieves, which in fact they were. At the front door, Theodore stopped and turned around, looking into the darkness of the house as if saying goodbye. For a moment his face was illuminated by the flashlight beam, and I saw a strange expression, a mixture of guilt and relief. Then Imogene tugged at his sleeve, and they disappeared out the door. I waited a few minutes, listening to the sounds outside. I heard the engine of their car start, the rustle of tires on the wet gravel of the driveway. Then silence, just the rain drumming on the roof. Walking to the window, I pulled back the curtain and watched the tail lights of their car disappear around the corner. They were gone, with my money. Or rather, with what they thought was my money. I went back into the study and turned on the light. The painting was hanging straight, as if it hadn't been touched, but I knew behind it was an empty safe. I didn't bother to check it. Instead, I sat down in my old chair and relaxed for the first time in a long time. The plan had worked. The trap had slammed shut. Now all that was left to do was wait for the consequences. I felt no joy or triumph, only fatigue and a strange sense of desolation. My own son had robbed me. I had seen it coming. I had been prepared, but the fact still hurt. Outside the window, it was beginning to lighten. The rain had stopped and the first rays of sunlight colored the sky a soft pink. A new day, the beginning of a new chapter in my life, a life without my son. I got up and went to the kitchen. I brewed coffee like I did every morning. The familiar action was soothing. While the coffee brewed, I thought about what had happened and what would happen next. Theodore and Imogene must be on their way, perhaps heading to Sioux Falls Airport, the closest international airport to Yankton. Or maybe they decided to stop by the bank first to deposit money into an account. Either way, they would soon discover the truth. I wondered how that would happen. Perhaps they'll decide to count the money in the car. Or Imogene, always more attentive to detail, will notice something odd on one of the bills. Or they might try to use the money to buy tickets. And then I pushed those thoughts away. It didn't matter exactly how they'd find out. What matters is that they stole the money, a crime in itself, and trying to use the training bills as real ones would only make it worse for them. Pouring myself a cup of coffee, I sat down at the kitchen table. On the table lay yesterday's newspaper. I opened it, but I couldn't concentrate on the words. My thoughts kept returning to the events of that night. I remembered sitting in that same chair a few months ago, talking to Ronnie Pearson about my plan. He was skeptical. "Are you sure you want to frame your own son?" he asked then. "I'm not setting him up," I replied. "I'm just preparing for what he'll probably do on his own. If he doesn't take the money, he'll never know about the switch." Ronnie shook his head. "And if he does? Are you prepared for the possibility that he might go to jail?" I've been thinking about that question for a long time. Am I ready for the possibility that my son could end up behind bars? The answer was painful, but unequivocal. If he decides to steal from me, then he's been on the slippery slope for a long time. Better to stop him now than to let him slide further down the slippery slope. Ronnie understood me then. He was a father himself, and he knew how hard it was to make those decisions. "There's one thing about these bills," he said, handing me the wads of training money. "They are made specifically for training. The banknotes have the same security features as the real ones. Watermarks, security thread, color-changing ink. But they have special markings. The word example on both sides and serial numbers starting with the letters XX. "That's easy to miss in the dark," I remarked. "Exactly, especially if the person is excited and in a hurry. But in the daylight or when you look closely, the differences are obvious. And most importantly, it's a federal offense to use such bills as real money." I asked then if I myself would be subject to a felony for possessing such bills. Ronnie explained that he had official authorization to use them for educational purposes, and he was willing to confirm that he had given them to me to familiarize me with the security features of real money, a kind of financial education for a retiree. My phone rang, snapping me out of my memories. It was Doreen. "Lemuel, you won't believe it." Her voice was ringing with excitement. "I just saw Theodore and that wife of his leaving town. This early." "Yeah?" I tried to make my voice sound surprised. "Yes. They raced past my house like they were being chased by all the demons of hell. And you know what's weird? There was a big gym bag in the back seat. Maybe they were in a hurry to get to the airport. Said something about an early flight." "The airport? But they said yesterday they were going to be in town all week." There must have been a change of plans. Doreen was silent, clearly unsatisfied with my explanation. "Are you all right, Lemuel? You sound strange." "I'm perfectly fine. I just didn't get much sleep." It was a noisy night. After saying goodbye to Doreen, I went back to my coffee. It was already cold, but I took a sip anyway. The bitter taste matched my mood. I imagined Theodore and Imogene driving down the highway now, discussing their plans for the future. How they were rejoicing in their good fortune, their ingenuity, building castles with the money they think they stole from me. And I felt sorry for them, not because they're going to be disappointed, but because they've come to a life where stealing from their own father seems like an acceptable solution to their problems. What led them to this? My excessive generosity in the past? Their own greed? Or was it a gradual process of moral decay, so slow that they themselves had not noticed they had crossed the line? I didn't know the answers to these questions. I only knew that there was no turning back. Theodore had severed our connection completely. He was no longer the boy I taught to fish. He was a thief, and he had to be punished. The clock read 6 in the morning. It was fully dawn outside the window. A new day had begun. I finished my coffee and went to the phone. It was time for the next step in my plan. I dialed Ronnie Pearson's number. "Ronnie, it's happened," I said without preamble when he answered. "They took the money tonight." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. Dash. "Absolutely. I saw them open the safe and take all the bundles. They left around 4 in the morning. Where they went, do you know? I'm guessing Sioux Falls. They were talking about buying plane tickets." "Okay, Ronnie's talking business now. I'm going to contact Sioux Falls PD and notify them. They'll be looking for your son and his wife. If they try to use those bills, they'll be arrested." "Thank you, Ronnie." "Don't thank me," his voice softened. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I thought for a moment. Was I sure? Did I really want my only son arrested? "Yes," I answered firmly. "Let things take their course." After talking to Ronnie, I felt strangely relieved. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted off my shoulders. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. I walked out onto the porch. The morning was fresh from the night's rain. The air smelled of wet earth and freshness. Birds were singing somewhere. Life went on despite the betrayal and pain. I thought about the real money safely hidden in the old beehive house, about what I would do when it was all over. Maybe leave Yankton, start a new life somewhere where no one knows me, where I don't have to explain why my son is in prison. But that would come later. For now, all I could do was wait, waiting for Theodore and Imogen to try to use the study bills. When they realized their plan had failed, when they faced the consequences of their choices. I returned to the house and began my usual morning ritual. Breakfast, reading the newspaper, a short walk in the garden. Everything was the same as always, but at the same time it was different. I felt a strange calmness mixed with sadness. The end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. The phone rang again around 9 in the morning. It was Ronnie. "Lemuel," he said without preamble. They'd been held up. They were trying to pay with study bills at the Sioux Falls airport. I sat up, feeling my legs wobbling. So soon? They were overconfident. Didn't even bother to scrutinize the money in daylight. The cashier at the airport noticed the marks and called security. Now they're testifying at the police station. What happens now? They'll be charged with theft and attempted use of counterfeit money. Those are serious charges, Lem, especially the federal one about counterfeiting. "I understand," I said quietly. "You're going to have to testify. Confirm that you didn't give them the money, that they stole it. I'm ready." After talking to Ronnie, I sat still for a long time, staring into space. Everything happened even faster than I expected. Theodore and Imogen had been so sure of success that they hadn't even checked their booty, and now they were paying for that arrogance. I imagined their faces when they found out the money was fake. Shock, disbelief, panic. They must have thought I wouldn't report the theft, that I'd be embarrassed to admit that my own son had robbed me, and they certainly didn't expect me to be ahead of them. Was it revenge on my part? In part, perhaps. But more, it was a lesson. A cruel, painful, but necessary lesson. Sometimes you have to inflict pain to prevent more pain in the future. I remembered my words to Theodore years ago on a fishing trip. Sometimes someone has to be hurt so that others can live. At the time, I was talking about a fish on a hook. Now those words have taken on a new, bitter meaning. After Ronnie's call, I sat in a daze for a while. Theodore and Imogen had been apprehended. My plan had worked even faster than I had expected. I felt no triumph or gloating, just a heaviness in my heart and a strange sense of desolation. But I knew I had to see it through. Not for myself, but for Theodore. Sometimes the greatest parental love shows itself in the hardest decisions. I dialed the number of Yankton's sheriff, Patrick Holden. We'd known each other for years. Everyone knows each other in a small town, especially if you work in the justice system. "Patrick, it's Lemuel Abercrombie," I said when he answered. "I have a problem. My son stole from me tonight." A pause followed. I could almost see Patrick straightening up in his chair, shifting from friendly conversation to professional. "What exactly happened, Lemuel?" "Theodore and his wife came yesterday, said they'd check on me, and then tonight, around 3 o'clock, they broke into my house and opened the safe, stole all my savings." "Are you sure it was them?" "Positive. I saw them with my own eyes. I woke up to a noise and saw them taking money out of the safe." "And you didn't stop them?" I wondered for a moment. How do I explain that I deliberately let my son steal the money? Yeah, I was scared, I said, hating myself for lying. They didn't know I was awake, and my heart wasn't in the best condition. I decided it was safer to let them leave and then turn to you. I understand. Patrick sounded sympathetic. How much did they take? About $750,000. I heard him whistle. That's a lot of money, Lem. Why did you keep so much cash at home? You know me, Patrick. I never trusted banks, especially since the crisis. Yeah, I know, he sighed. Can you come down to the station to make a formal report of the theft? Of course, I answered. But there's something you should know. The money they stole, it's not exactly ordinary money. What do you mean? They're training bills, the ones used to train cashiers and cops. They look like the real thing, but they have special markings that invalidate them. There was silence on the phone. Where'd you get those bills, Lemuel? Dash Ronnie Pearson. We're old friends, you know. He gave them to me a few months ago for, well, let's say, for educational purposes. I've long suspected Theodore might try to steal my savings, so I replaced the real money with this. And where is the real money? In a safe place, I answered evasively. The important thing is that Theodore and Imogen stole the study bills thinking they were real, and are probably already trying to use them. This is serious, Lem. Patrick's voice became hard. Using those bills as real bills is a federal offense. It's considered counterfeiting money. I know, I said quietly. And you still framed your own son for such a charge? I closed my eyes. There it was, the moment of truth. I didn't set him up, Patrick. I just anticipated what he might do and prepared. If he hadn't tried to steal my money, nothing would have happened to him. Patrick was silent for a long time. I could almost see him struggling between professional duty and human sympathy. All right, he said at last. Come down to the station as soon as possible. We need your official statement. And Lemuel, I'm really sorry about all this. Me too, Patrick. Me too. I hung up the phone and sat still for a while, collecting my thoughts. Then I got up slowly and got dressed. I had to go to the police station. There was no turning back. On the way to the station, I thought back to how it had all started, how the idea of trapping my own son was born. It was about a year ago. Theodore and Imogen had once again come asking for money. This time they needed $15,000 to pay off their credit card debts. This is the last time, Dad, Theodore assured me, as he had done dozens of times before. We'll get out of debt and we won't bother you again. I gave them the money, as I always did, but this time I decided to see what they'd spend it on. It's not that I didn't trust my son, I just wanted to make sure he really used it for its intended purpose. The day after they left, I called Ronnie Pearson. He was retired by then, but still had ties to active police officers. Ronnie, I need a favor, I said. Unofficial. What's up, Lem? I explained the situation. Ronnie listened and promised to help. A few days later, he called back. Your money didn't go to pay your debts, he said without preamble. At least not the debts your son was talking about. What was it for? A vacation in the Bahamas. They booked a 2-week trip for two. Expensive hotel, all-inclusive. I felt something snap inside. Not just resentment or disappointment, a deep, overarching realization that my son had lied to me. Not for the first time, probably, and it wouldn't be the last. After that, I watched their actions more closely. With Ronnie's help, I learned about their debts. Tens of thousands of dollars in credit card debt, late car payments, unpaid taxes. They were living beyond their means, spending more than they earned and constantly getting into new debts to pay off old ones. And whenever the situation became critical, they came to me. With sad eyes, with stories of temporary hardship, with promises that this was the last time. At some point, I realized that by helping them, I was only making the problem worse. Theodore would never learn responsibility if I kept pulling him out of the financial holes he had dug for himself. I stopped giving them money. First they were surprised, then they were offended. Then they became more subtle, telling me about non-existent illnesses, problems with my employer, anything to get my sympathy and open my wallet. And 6 months ago, I overheard them talking when they thought I was asleep. He won't last long, Imogen said. Have you seen what he looks like? Another year or two more, tops. Don't say that, Theodore replied, but there was no real reproach in his voice. I'm just being realistic. and we need to think about the future. Our future. You're his only son. You'll get everything. Unless he changes his will. Why would he? You're such a caring son. You visit him, help around the house. He has no idea we know about his money. As I lay in my bedroom listening to my son and his wife discuss my pending death and inheritance, I felt a chill run down my spine. They weren't just waiting for me to die, they were counting the days. And worst of all, they knew about my savings, the money I kept in the safe behind the painting. I never told Theodore the exact amount. He knew I had savings, but he didn't know how much. Where did he get that information? And then I remembered. A few months ago, Theodore was helping me renovate my house. At some point, I'd gone to the store to get paint, leaving him alone. That must have been when he discovered the safe and saw the money. From that day on, I began to notice a change in their behavior. They started calling more often, visiting more often, each time with gifts, offers of help. Theodore suddenly became interested in my health, my well-being, and Imogene began to suggest moving into a nursing home. Where you'll be taken care of, Lemuel. I realized that they weren't just waiting for me to die. They were ready to speed things up if the opportunity presented itself. Not necessarily physically, just enough to declare me incapacitated, to take guardianship, to gain access to my finances. That's when I decided to act. I called Ronnie and told him what I suspected. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Mine is protect my money and teach Theodore a lesson." "What kind of lesson?" "Hard," I admitted, "but necessary." The plan didn't happen right away. Ronnie and I discussed the options at length. At first, we thought we'd just hide the money and let Theodore find the empty safe. But that didn't solve the main problem, his attitude to other people's property, to other people's money. My money. What if we replaced the real money with study bills? Ronnie suggested at one point, the ones used to train cashiers and police officers. "Where do you get those?" "I can get them. I still have connections in the department." I thought about it. It was risky. If Theodore actually took the money and tried to use it, he'd be arrested. He could end up in prison. My only son. "It's a big step, Lem," Ronnie continued, seeing my hesitation. "Think it over." I thought long and hard. I thought back to Theodore the child, Theodore the teenager, the dreams I'd made about his future, and compared it to what he'd become, a man who deceives his own father, who waits for me to die so he can inherit, who might be willing to declare me incompetent to get to my money sooner. "Let's do it," I finally said. "Let him learn his lesson." 2 weeks later, Ronnie brought me the study bills. $750,000, the exact amount of my savings. They looked almost indistinguishable from the real thing. Only when you look closely could you see the word example on both sides and the special serial numbers. "Are you sure about this?" No," Ronnie asked as I counted the bills. I was sure, I answered, though I was still struggling with doubts inside. "What will you do with the real money?" "I'll hide it somewhere safe, someplace Theodore would never think to look." That same day, I opened the safe and took out all my savings. Then I carefully arranged the training bills just like the real ones. From the outside, the safe looked the same as before, full of money. I stashed the real money in an old beehive house in the far corner of the garden. No one, not even Theodore, knew that there was a secret compartment in the hive that Martha and I used to keep especially valuable things in. My savings were safe there. As I finished my preparations, I felt a strange calmness. The trap was ready. Now all I had to do was wait to see if Theodore would make the move I expected him to make. A step that would finally destroy our relationship, but perhaps save him from even greater moral degradation. I hoped I was wrong, that my suspicions would not be justified, that Theodore would never try to steal my money, that the trap would go unclaimed. But deep down inside, I knew the truth. I knew that sooner or later the temptation would become too strong, and Theodore would make his choice. And now here I sit in Yankton Police Station, filling out a theft report, officially reporting that my own son has stolen from me. The wheel of fate had come full circle. Patrick Holden sat across from me, watching me carefully as I signed the paperwork. His face reflected a mixture of professional duty and human sympathy. "Are you sure you want to do this, Lemuel?" he asked as I put the pen away. "It's not too late to withdraw your application." "I'm sure, Patrick," I replied firmly. "What Theodore did cannot go unpunished." Even if it might end in jail time for him, I thought for a moment. Could I live with the thought of sending my own son to jail? Even so, I said finally, sometimes the hardest choice is the only right one. Patrick nodded understandingly. He'd been a cop long enough to see families broken up over money, relatives betraying each other for material gain. We've already contacted the Sioux Falls police, he said. They confirmed that Theodore and Imogene were apprehended while trying to buy airline tickets using study bills. What will happen to them next? They will be brought here to face charges: theft, fraud, attempted use of counterfeit money. It's a serious list, Lem. I nodded, feeling heavy in my chest. Everything was happening exactly as I had planned. So why wasn't I feeling satisfied? When would they be delivered? I asked. Tomorrow morning, Patrick answered. You have time to think about it. I got up, preparing to leave. Patrick walked me to the door. Lemuel, he said when I was already at the door, whatever happens, remember that you did what you thought was right. No one can judge you for it. I nodded gratefully and went outside. The day was clear and warm, but all I felt was cold inside, a cold that never seemed to go away. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery. Martha's grave was tended as always. I came here myself every week, bringing fresh flowers, talking to her, telling her about my life, about Theodore. What would you say now, Martha? I asked you, standing by the tombstone, did I do the right thing, or had I betrayed my own son? There was no answer, of course, only the silence of the cemetery and the light breeze rustling in the leaves of the trees. Martha had always been gentler with me about Theodore, always defending him, even when he was wrong. He's still young, Lemuel. He's learning. But what would she say now, when a young Theodore in his 40s is stealing from his own father? I didn't know the answer, and I probably never will. When I returned home, I found Doreen on the porch. She looked worried. Lemuel, I saw you go into the police station. What happened? I sighed. News travels fast in small towns. By tonight, all of Yankton will know that Theodore Abercrombie has been arrested for stealing money from his own father. Come in, Doreen, I said. I'll explain everything. We sat in the kitchen drinking tea, and I told her a simplified version of events. How Theodore and Imogen had stolen my savings. How they'd been caught trying to spend it. I didn't mention the trap, the money switch. Those were details that didn't everyone needs to know. My God, Lemuel, Doreen was shocked. How could he? His own father. People change, Doreen, not always for the better. What are you going to do now? Move on, I said simply. What else is there left? When Doreen left, I was alone again in an empty house. A house that had once been full of laughter and love. A house where Theodore had grown up, where Martha and I had been happy. A house that now seemed a shell of its former self. I went to the window and took a long look at the street, at the neighboring houses, at the familiar landscape of Yankton. The city in which I had lived most of my life. The town that knew me as Lemuel Abercrombie, a respected bailiff, a good neighbor, a decent man. And tomorrow this town will know me as the father who sent his own son to jail. Can I live with that? Could I go out every day, meet my neighbors, see the sympathy or condemnation in their eyes? But the alternative was even worse. To let Theodore escape the consequences would be to reinforce the idea that he could break the law with impunity, betray loved ones, take advantage of others' trust. No, I made the right choice. Hard, painful, but the right one. Now all I had to do was live with the consequences of that choice and hope that someday, maybe Theodore would understand the lesson I was trying to teach him. Though deep down I knew that would probably never happen. The next morning I woke up with a feeling that today was going to be different. The sky outside my window was clear, as if nature itself had decided to witness the denouement of our family drama. I stood under the shower for a long time, letting the hot water wash away the tension of the last few days. It was going to be a tough day ahead. After breakfast, I received a call from Patrick Holden. Lemuel, they're arriving in an hour. Do you want to be there, I wondered? Did I want to see my son being led into the Yankton police station in handcuffs? Did I want to witness his shame, his humiliation? No, I answered after a pause. Tell me later what happened. I will. I'll let you know when it's over. As I hung up the phone, I felt inexplicably anxious. I needed to get out of the house, get some fresh air, clear my head. I decided to walk to the park. The same park where I had sat yesterday, thinking about my plan. On the way, I met a few neighbors. They nodded and said hello as usual, but I could see curiosity in their eyes. News of Theodore had already begun to spread. By evening, all of Yankton would know that Lemuel Abercrombie's son had been arrested for theft. In the park, I sat on the same bench as yesterday. From here, I had a view of the Missouri River, calm and majestic. I looked at it and thought about how it all began. Theodore was 5 years old when I first noticed signs of greed in him. Martha and I had given him a bicycle for Christmas. He was happy until he saw a neighbor boy get a better one. Theodore threw a tantrum, demanding one just like it. Martha wanted to give in, but I insisted. He should learn to be grateful for what he has, I said. Martha sighed. He's still a child, Lemuel. Children always want more. That's why we must teach him to control those desires. Otherwise, he'll grow up spoiled. And so it was. Despite my best efforts, Theodore grew up believing the world owed him something. Perhaps I was too strict, or maybe I wasn't strict enough, or maybe I just spent too little time at home with my work. Being a bailiff took a lot of time and energy. Martha compensated for my strictness with her gentleness. She always yielded to Theodore, always defended him, even when he was wrong. He's just a kid. He doesn't understand yet. He didn't mean it. Her excuses were endless. And when Theodore became a teenager, things got more complicated. He learned to manipulate us, to play on the contradictions between Martha and me. If I refused him something, he would go to his mother, and she would often give him what he wanted in secret. I remember the day I discovered Theodore had taken money from my wallet without asking. He was 15. The amount was small, only $20. But it wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. And that's stealing, I told him at the time. If you want money, you have to ask for it. I knew you wouldn't give it to me, he replied defiantly. And so you decided to take it without asking? That's what thieves do, Theodore. You're a cheapskate, he shouted. You've got a wallet full of money, and you spare $20 for your own son. Martha stepped in, defending him as always. Lemuel, don't exaggerate. It's not like he stole from strangers. And he'll pay that money back, won't he, Theodore? He nodded, but I could see that there was no sincerity in the gesture. There was only one thing in his eyes. He had won this round. After that incident, I began to notice small sums of money going missing more and more often. Theodore never admitted it, even when I accused him directly. And Martha always took his side. You're too suspicious, Lemuel, she said. Maybe you spent the money yourself and forgot about it. I gave in, not wanting to quarrel with my wife. And Theodore saw it and learned. Learned that you can avoid responsibility if you play your cards right. When he went to college, Martha and I paid for his tuition and housing. It wasn't easy. We had to give up a lot to give our son an education, but we felt it was an investment in his future. However, Theodore did not live up to our hopes. Instead of studying, he spent his time partying. His grades were mediocre. Twice he was almost expelled for violating the dormitory rules. Martha was still defending him. He's just enjoying student life, Lemuel. Everyone goes through it, but I saw beyond that. I saw that our son wasn't just enjoying life. He was avoiding responsibility, avoiding difficulty, always looking for the easy way out. In his 3rd year, he met Imogen. She was beautiful, ambitious, and, as I realized later, as materialistic as Theodore. They were a perfect match. Imogen came from a poor family and saw Theodore as a ticket to a better life. She saw him not only as a man, but as an opportunity to live the life she had always wanted. Martha immediately sensed something wrong. There's something wrong about her, Lemuel. She looks at our boy as a project to be remade to suit herself. I brushed off her concerns, writing them off as my mother-in-law's usual jealousy of her daughter-in-law. But as with so many things, Martha was right. Theodore had changed even more since the wedding. Imogen had completely reshaped him, from his hair to the way he spoke. She instilled in him new ambitions, new desires. Now he didn't just want a comfortable life, he wanted luxury. And when Martha died, the last restraint was gone. Theodore and Imogen started treating me like an ATM machine. Every visit ended with them asking for money. And I gave out of guilt, out of love, out of a desire to keep some connection to my son. But there's a limit to everything, and I had reached my limit. I was distracted from my thoughts by the phone ringing. It was Patrick. Lemuel, they're here. Do you want to know the details? Yes, go ahead. I gripped the phone tighter. They were picked up yesterday at Sioux Falls Airport. They were trying to buy tickets to Los Angeles and from there to Mexico. The cashier noticed some weirdness in the bills when they started paying, so he called security. How did they react? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Theodore was shocked. He swore that the money was real, that it belonged to his father, to you. Imogene was more aggressive, threatening to sue, screaming that their rights had been violated. I pictured the scene, the airport cashier looking at the bills, the security guards surrounding Theodore and Imogene, their confusion turning to panic. My son, my boy, caught like a thief. What happened next? I asked quietly. The Sioux Falls police apprehended them and checked the bills. It was confirmed that they were training money, not intended for circulation. Theodore continued to insist that he didn't know that, claimed he took the money from your safe, thinking it was real. Did he confess to the theft? Aha, yes, but he tried to defend himself. Said you had promised him the money, that it was rightfully his, that you had simply forgotten your promise because of senile forgetfulness. I grinned bitterly. Even now, caught red-handed, Theodore was looking for ways to avoid responsibility. And Imogene? She's changed her tactics. Now she's claiming it was your idea to switch the money, that you set them up on purpose to get them in trouble. Technically, Imogene was right. I did switch the money knowing Theodore would steal it, but I didn't force him to steal it. He made that choice on his own. What's going to happen to them? Right now, they're in a holding cell. They'll have a preliminary hearing tomorrow. They'll be charged with theft and attempted use of counterfeit money. Those are serious charges, Lem, especially the second one, which is a federal offense. I understand. They asked to contact you, Patrick added after a pause. They want to talk. I wondered. Was I prepared for this conversation? What could I say to the son who'd stolen from me? What could he say to justify me? No, I finally said. Not now. I understand. Patrick's voice was soft. Let me know if you change your mind. After I talked to Patrick, I sat in the park for a long time, staring at the river. Thoughts swarmed in my head, memories overlapping. I remembered Theodore learning to ride a bike, how happy he was when he finally succeeded, how he proudly shouted, "Daddy, look! I can do it! I can do it!" I remembered his first day of school, how he was brave, but there was fear in his eyes, how I squatted down in front of him and said, "You can do it, son. You're strong." I remembered his high school graduation, his college enrollment, his wedding, all these milestones, all these moments that were supposed to mold a decent man. What went wrong? Maybe I expected too much from him. Maybe Martha and I made some parenting mistakes. Or maybe some people are just born with certain tendencies, and no amount of upbringing can change them. I didn't know the answer, and perhaps I never would. When I returned home, I found Doreen on the porch. She was fidgeting nervously with the edge of her scarf. "Lemuel," she exclaimed when she saw me. "You wouldn't believe what's going on in town." Everyone is talking about Theodore and Imogene. They say they were brought to the police station in handcuffs. That's right, I confirmed, opening the door. Come in, Doreen. Tea? She followed me in, still talking. It's awful, Lemuel. Just awful. Your own son. How could he? People change, Doreen. I repeated a phrase I'd said to her yesterday. Not always for the better. But to steal from your own father, and that amount of money? Sure, money changes people, I said, putting the kettle on. You have no idea how much. Doreen shook her head, clearly not understanding my calmness. What's going to happen now? Is he going to go to jail? Maybe. I pulled the cups out of the cupboard. That's for the courts to decide. Oh my God, Doreen put her hand to her mouth. How does that make you feel, Lemuel? I wondered. What did I feel? Anger, disappointment, sadness. All of those emotions were there, mixed into a complex cocktail that I didn't even try to untangle. Fatigue, I said finally. I feel tired, Doreen. She looked at me sympathetically, not understanding the depth of my fatigue. Tired of the lies, of the manipulation, of the endless disappointments. Tired of having to be strong when everything was crumbling inside. After Doreen left, I sat in the kitchen, staring into space. The phone rang several times. probably other neighbors and acquaintances, wanting to express sympathy or just satisfy curiosity. I didn't answer it. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album and began flipping through the pages. Here was Theodore the baby in Martha's arms. There's his first birthday cake with a candle, his face smeared with cream. Here he is fishing, proudly holding his first catch. Page after page, year after year. The story of my son, the story of our family. When did it all go wrong? At what point did a loving boy turn into a man capable of stealing from his own father? Maybe it was money. Money has a strange power over people. I've seen it countless times in my years as a bailiff. I've seen money destroy families, friendships, love. How it has caused people to betray those closest to them. Or maybe it's Imogene. I never fully trusted her. I always felt something fake about her, insincere. Maybe she encouraged Theodore to steal. But even so, he made his choice. No one held a gun to his temple. I closed the album and set it aside. You can't change the past. One can only accept it and move on. The phone rang again. This time I decided to answer it. It was Ronnie Pearson. "Lem, I just found out," he said without preamble. "How are you?" "Alive," I answered briefly. "I'm hanging in there. It's hard, I know, but you did what you had to do. Theodore chose his path, and now he has to face the consequences." "Yes, he does, but it doesn't make it any easier." "Do you want me to come over?" Ronnie offered. "You shouldn't be alone right now." I thought about it. Ronnie had been my friend for years. He knew me, he knew Martha, he knew Theodore. He understood the situation better than anyone else. "Come on over," I said. "I'd love the company." An hour later, Ronnie was at my place. We sat in the backyard, drinking whiskey and talking about the past, about work, about life, everything but Theodore. It was exactly what I needed, the quiet, understanding presence of a friend who didn't demand explanations or give unsolicited advice. When it got dark, we moved into the house. Ronnie offered to stay the night, and I didn't object. In a house filled with the ghosts of the past, the presence of a living person was a comfort. In the morning, Patrick Holden called. "Lemuel, the preliminary hearing is set for 10 o'clock in the morning. Will you be there?" I looked at Ronnie sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He nodded, silently supporting me. "Yes," I answered. "I'll be there." The courtroom was quiet, even though it was filled to capacity. All Yankton seemed to be here to see Lemuel Abercrombie's son brought to trial. I sat in the last row next to Ronnie. From there I could see the back of Theodore's head, sitting next to his lawyer, a young man looking almost as confused as his client. Imogene sat separately with another lawyer. Her straight back and head held high said that she was not going to give up without a fight. When the judge was introduced, everyone stood up. The proceedings began. The prosecutor read out the charges: grand larceny and attempted use of counterfeit currency. The lawyers pleaded not guilty. I listened to all this as if from a distance, as if it were not about my son, but about some stranger. It was only when Theodore turned around and our eyes met that I felt a stab of pain. His gaze was accusation, anger, and surprisingly, incomprehension. It was as if he genuinely didn't understand what he had done wrong. It was in that moment that I realized I had lost my son long before that day. Maybe even long before I planned my trap. Lost the moment he decided he could take what wasn't his. When he decided that laws and rules were for others, but not for him. After the hearing, as Theodore and Imogen were being led back to their cell, Theodore looked at me again. There was only one expression in his eyes now: betrayal, as if I had betrayed him, not him betraying me. And in that moment, I realized I could never forgive him. Not for stealing the money could be made again, but for betraying everything I tried to teach him, for throwing away years of love and care, for breaking Martha's heart, even if she couldn't feel it anymore. As I walked out of the courtroom, I could feel the stares on me. Some were sympathetic, some were curious, and some were judgmental, as if it was my fault that my son had grown up to be a thief. Maybe it was. Maybe I really was a bad father. Maybe if I had been gentler or sterner, or just spent more time with him, things would have turned out differently. But you can't change the past. You can only accept it and move on. And that's exactly what I was going to do. We went outside with Ronnie. The day was sunny and warm. as if nature was mocking the gloominess of what was happening. "What now?" Ronnie asked as we walked to the car. "Now what?" I looked up at the sky, at the trees, at the people passing by, at the life that went on, in spite of everything. "I'm going to go on living now, Ronnie. What else is there left?" It's been a week since the preliminary hearing. Yankton was slowly returning to its normal life, although the story of the son stealing from his father was still the main topic of conversation in town. My phone rang less frequently. The curiosity of the neighbors was fading, giving way to new gossip and events. I was sitting in the kitchen, looking through the morning paper, when the phone rang. It was Theodore's lawyer. "Mr. Abercrombie," he began in a formal tone, "I am calling at your son's request." "Yes," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. "As you know, the court has set bail at $100,000. Theodore asked you to post that amount so that he can get out before the trial." I remained silent, contemplating the situation. $100,000 is a considerable sum, but it's not impossible for me. I could pay that bail. The question was whether I wanted to. "Mr. Abercrombie," the lawyer's voice interrupted my musings. "I heard you," I said. "But the answer is no. I won't be posting bail." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Are you sure? This is your son we're talking about." "That's why I'm saying no," I said firmly. "Theodore must be held accountable for his actions. All these years I've been protecting him, helping him, getting him out of trouble. And what has that led to? He stole from me." I understand your feelings," the lawyer spoke carefully, choosing his words, "but perhaps this is too harsh a judgment. Theodore claims he didn't know the money was switched, that he thought it was real." "That doesn't change the fact that he stole it," I parried. "He broke into my house in the middle of the night and took something that didn't belong to him. Even if the money was real, it would still be theft." "But Theodore says you promised him the money," the lawyer continued to insist, "that you were going to help him with his business project." I sighed. Theodore hadn't changed. The same attempts at manipulation, the same excuses. "I never promised him that kind of money," I said firmly. "I did want to help him with his project, but it was a much smaller sum, and helping, not stealing, is different." "I understand." The lawyer's voice sounded tired. "I guess that Theodore wasn't the easiest client. There is one more matter. Theodore is asking you to pay for the services of a more experienced attorney. He feels that I'm underqualified for such a serious case. It was so like Theodore to ask for help first and then criticize what he got." "No," I answered even more forcefully. "I will not pay for another lawyer. I will no longer support Theodore financially at all. This is my final decision." After the conversation with the lawyer, I sat staring into space for a long time. The decision had been made and I wasn't going to back down. But it wasn't easy. It went against every paternal instinct to refuse to help my son when he was in trouble. But I knew it was necessary, not just for me, but for him. All my life I had protected Theodore from the consequences of his actions. And what has come of it? A grown man who doesn't understand the connection between actions and results, who thinks he can do whatever he wants and his father will always be there to clean up his mess. No, this time would be different. This time Theodore had to face the consequences of his actions, even if it meant jail time. 2 days later, I got a call from Imogen. I wasn't expecting this call. It seemed to me that she would rather never speak to me again. "Lemuel?" Her voice was strained but controlled. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "You have to help Theodore. You can't just leave him in this situation." "Why not?" I asked bluntly. "He stole from me, Imogen. My own son stole from me. Why should I help him?" "Because you're his father." There was a hint of irritation in her voice. "Parents are supposed to protect their children." "Protect, yes. Indulging in crime, no. Theodore says you set him up," she continued in an accusing tone. "That you switched the money on purpose, knowing he could take it." "Why would he take my money without asking, Imogen?" I tried to speak calmly, though I was seething inside. Even if the money was real, it would still be stealing. She was silent for a moment, clearly not expecting this. "We were desperate," she said finally. "We were in debt. Creditors were calling every day. We just wanted a fresh start. At my expense, I added. Stealing my money instead of honestly asking for help. We did, but you said no. I turned down $750,000 for a questionable business project, I clarified. That doesn't mean I wouldn't have helped you pay off your debts if you'd been honest with me. It doesn't matter. Her voice became hard again. What matters is that Theodore's in jail now, and you refuse to help. It's inhumane. You know what's inhumane, Imogen. My patience is wearing thin. Stealing from an old man who's been helping you for years, planning how to spend his money while he's still alive, declaring him insane if he objects. That's inhuman. I don't know what you're talking about. I heard you talking the other night, I interrupted her, about how you'd say I was suffering from senile dementia if I reported the theft. How you'll spend my money while I'm still alive. I heard that, Imogen. There was silence at the other end of the line. It was just a joke, she said at last, but there was no confidence in her voice. We both know it wasn't, I replied tiredly. Listen, Imogen, I'm not going to help Theodore out on bail or hire him an expensive lawyer. This is my final decision. You'll both have to face the consequences of your actions. You'll regret it, her voice became menacing. Theodore is your only son. When you're older, when you need help, who will be there for you? You have no one else. Sure, not anymore, I agreed. But you know, it's better to be alone than with people who only see you as a wallet. I hung up the phone, feeling strangely relieved. Talking to Imogen had finally convinced me that I'd made the right decision. She and Theodore weren't sorry for what they'd done. They were only sorry for getting caught. I couldn't sleep for a long time that night. Imogen's words kept running through my mind. You have no one else. It was true. After Martha's death and Theodore's betrayal, I was alone. Friends, neighbors, they were there for me, but it wasn't the same as family. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thought about what I would do next. Stay in Yankton? Here, where every corner reminded me of the past? Where everyone knew me as the father who sent his son to prison? No, I had to start a new life, in a new place, with new people, maybe even with a new name, not to hide, but to let go of the past. I woke up this morning with a clear plan of action. The first order of business was to get the real money from the stash. I went out into the garden in the early morning, when the dew was still glistening on the grass. The old beehive house stood in the far corner of the garden, partially hidden by the overgrown lilac bushes. No one had paid attention to it in years, just an old wooden building, a relic of bygone days. I opened the door of the cabin. Everything inside was just as it had been when Martha kept bees, the honeycomb frames, the tools, the hazmat suit neatly stacked on a shelf. I pulled back one of the wall panels that hid a small stash. There, wrapped in a waterproof cloth, lay my savings, $750,000 in cash. I took the money out and held it in my hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it. All my life I'd been frugal, saving for a rainy day, denying myself a lot of things to keep my family safe. And this is how it turned out. When I got back to the house, I stashed the money in my travel bag. Then I began to make a list of things to do. Sell the house, close all the accounts at the local bank, get rid of unnecessary things, decide what to do with furniture and personal belongings. The thing that bothered me the most was Martha's grave. I couldn't just drive away and leave her unattended. After some thought, I decided to contract with a local grave care company. It was expensive, but I had the money now. Around noon, I got a call from Patrick Holden. Lemuel, have you heard the news? What news? I was tense, expecting something to do with Theodore. Imogen has agreed to cooperate with the prosecutor's office. She's testifying against Theodore. I wasn't surprised. Imogen always thought of herself first. What exactly is she saying? That the theft was Theodore's idea, that he'd been planning it for months, that she tried to talk him out of it, but he insisted. That's a lie, I said calmly. I'd heard their conversation. Imogen was the driving force behind it. She pushed Theodore, manipulated him. I thought so, Patrick sighed. But it's her word against his, and the prosecutor's office is inclined to believe her, especially if she continues to cooperate. What does that mean for Theodore? Most likely a harsher sentence. especially if Imogene gets a plea bargain and a reduced sentence in exchange for testimony. I closed my eyes, feeling my heart clench. Yes, I wanted Theodore to be held accountable for his actions, but I didn't want him to be the scapegoat while Imogen, no less guilty, got off scot-free. "What can I do?" I asked. "You can testify about what you heard. Tell me about the conversation you overheard." I hesitated. It would mean interfering, helping Theodore. Did it contradict my decision to withdraw? "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Thanks for the information, Patrick." After my conversation with Patrick, I sat still for a long time thinking, should I help Theodore or not? On the one hand, I decided to deny him financial support so that he would finally learn to take responsibility for his actions. On the other hand, it seemed unfair to let Imogene get away with blaming it on him. In the end, I decided that I would testify about the overheard conversation, not for Theodore's sake, but for the truth. I wanted them both to get what they deserved, no more, no less. The next day I went to Madison, a town 80 miles from Yankton. No one there knew me. No one looked at me with sympathy or judgment. I could have just been an older man minding my own business. At the local bank, I opened an account in my name and deposited most of the cash. The teller looked at me with suspicion. It's not every day that older people bring in such sums in cash. But I explained that I had sold my house and preferred to keep the money in a safe place. It wasn't exactly the truth, but close enough to it. After the bank, I visited a real estate agency. I needed a place to live. Not too big, but comfortable. A place where I could start a new life. The agent showed me several options, but the one I liked best was a small house on the outskirts of town. It was old but sturdy, with a garden and a veranda facing south. Something about it reminded me of my first house with Martha, the one we'd moved into right after we were married, long before Theodore was born. "I'll take it," I told the agent, not even haggling. I had the money and not much time. Back in Yankton, I began to prepare for the move. I sorted my things, packed what I wanted to take with me, gave away what I didn't need. It was a strange feeling, taking apart a life collected over 75 years. Each thing brought back memories. The old armchair Martha liked to read in, the kitchen table where we had breakfast every morning, Theodore's toys I kept in the attic, the wooden horse I'd made for him with my own hands, the collection of tin soldiers, the model airplane we'd spent an entire summer building together. What do I do with all this stuff? Take it with me? Throw it away? Give it away? In the end, I decided to leave most of it in the house. Let the new owners decide their fate. I would take only the essentials and a few memorabilia. Martha's photographs, our wedding rings, her favorite brooch. I decided to take Theodore's photos too. Not all of them, just a few from when he was little, and we were a happy family. Not to look at them all the time and be sad about the past, but to remember that things had once been different. A week after opening the account in Madison, I received a call from Theodore's attorney. "Mr. Abercrombie," he began without preamble, "Theodore asked to see you." "Why?" I asked bluntly. "He wants to apologize. To discuss the possibility of your assistance." "Not financially," the lawyer quickly added, obviously remembering my earlier refusal, "but in the form of testimony against Imogene." "I already talked to the prosecutor," I said. "Told him about the conversation I'd overheard, that Imogene was the instigator, not the victim of circumstance, as she's trying to portray." "That's good," I could hear the relief in the lawyer's voice. "But Theodore would still like to see you in person," I wondered. Was I ready for this meeting? To see my son behind bars, to hear his apology, which was probably not sincere? An apology dictated not by remorse, but by a desire for help? "No," I said finally. "I'm not ready for that, and I don't think I ever will be." "I understand," the lawyer's voice was quiet. "Shall I give him something from you?" I wondered. What could I say to the son who had betrayed me? What words could express the depth of my disappointment, my pain? "Tell him," I began slowly, choosing my words, "that I hope one day he will understand why I cannot forgive him. That perhaps when he himself is older, he will realize that some betrayals cannot be atoned for, and that no matter what, I wish for him to find his way and become a better person than he is now." On the day of the move, I woke up early. The sun was just beginning to rise above the horizon, coloring the sky a soft pink. I sipped my coffee on the veranda, looking out at the garden, at the old beehive house, at the road leading away from the house. Everything was ready. Things were packed, papers signed, money transferred. The house was sold to a family from Sioux Falls, a young couple with 2 children. They seemed happy, full of plans and hopes. I hoped this house would bring them more happiness than it had brought me in recent years. The last thing I did before leaving was to visit the cemetery. Martha's grave was tended as always. I put fresh flowers on it, white lilies, her favorite. "I'm leaving, Martha," I said quietly, standing in front of the headstone, "starting a new life. I know you'd want me to stay by Theodore's side to support him, but I can't, not after what he did." The wind rustled the leaves in the trees as if Martha were answering me. "I've arranged for the grave to be tended," I continued, "and I'll visit. Not often, but I will. You will always be with me, wherever I am." I stood there for a while, remembering our life together, our joys and sorrows. Then I turned and walked to my car. As I drove out of Yankton, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and release. Sadness at leaving behind a part of my life, my history, and liberation from the weight of the past, from the pain of betrayal, from the constant reminder of what I had lost. The drive to Madison took about 2 hours. I drove leisurely, enjoying the views, pondering the future. What would I do in a new city? Will I find new hobbies, new friends, perhaps even a new life partner? The thought made me smile. At 75, starting a romantic relationship seemed almost absurd. But why not? I was healthy, sane, financially secure, and most importantly, free. Free from obligation, free from manipulation, free from having to constantly help my ungrateful son. Driving into Madison, I felt a surge of energy. The city was beautiful, with wide streets and old buildings. It reminded me of Yankton, but without the weight of memories associated with every corner. My new home greeted me with silence and coolness. It was empty except for the basic furniture I had pre-ordered. The boxes of belongings were to arrive later, along with the movers. I walked through the rooms getting used to the new space. Here, within these walls, there was no history of betrayal. Here I could start with a clean slate, just be Lemuel Abercrombie, an elderly gentleman living a quiet, peaceful life. In the evening, sitting on the veranda of my new home and watching the sunset, I reflected on what had happened in the past weeks. About Theodore's betrayal, about my trap, about the consequences. Had my reaction been too harsh? Perhaps. But I saw no other way to teach my son that actions have consequences. That you can't just take what doesn't belong to you and expect to get away with it. I didn't know how Theodore and Imogene's trial would end. I didn't know what kind of sentence they'd get, if any. That was no longer my concern. I'd done all I could do. I'd given a truthful statement, explained the situation. The rest was in the hands of the law. When it got dark, I went back into the house and turned on the lights. Empty rooms, bare walls. Everything was waiting for me to fill this space with my life. My things, my habits, my presence. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The end of a life where I was Theodore Abercrombie's father, and the beginning of a life where I was simply Lemuel, a man who had survived betrayal but hadn't let it break him. As I fell asleep in a new bed, in a new house, in a new city, I thought about how family is more than just blood ties. It is mutual respect, caring, honesty. Without these qualities, even the closest relatives become strangers. Theodore made his choice. Now I've made mine. And maybe someday, in another life, we'll meet again and we can start over. But not in this life. In this life, I was ready to move on. Without my son, but with a sense of dignity and a belief that the best days were yet to come.